I spent 4 years of my life orbiting a man who barely noticed I existed. I was his satellite, his cheerleader, his emotional caretaker, everything except his equal. I was the sun that rose and set according to his moods, the warmth that he took for granted, the light he never bothered to look at directly. My name is Elena Bennett, and this is the story of how I finally stopped rising for someone else and learned to shine for myself. It began, as these things often do, with a slow erosion I didn't even recognize was happening. Like water wearing down stone over decades, the little compromises, the quiet sacrifices, the constant adjustments, they all seemed so small in the moment. But they added up. They always do. The beginning of the orbit, I met Marcus Hale at a mutual friend's housewarming party. I was 27, tired of chaotic dating, and desperate for something stable. He was 31, an architect with sharp cheekbones and an even sharper mind, the kind of man who seemed to have everything figured out. He walked into that small apartment with a quiet confidence that drew every eye in the room, but his gaze landed on me. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," he said, handing me a glass of wine I hadn't asked for. I laughed, surprised by his directness. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who knows how to read people," he said, settling onto the couch beside me. "I'm Marcus." "Elena," I said, and for the first time in months, I felt seen. That was the trap, you see. The feeling of being seen. I had spent years feeling invisible, overlooked, merely adequate in a world that demanded extraordinary. Marcus looked at me like I was the most interesting person in the room, and I drank it in like a woman dying of thirst. We talked for hours that night. He told me about his work, the buildings he designed, the clients he managed, the pressure of deadlines and expectations. I told him about my job in marketing, my complicated relationship with my mother, my dreams of doing something more meaningful with my life. He listened intently, asked thoughtful questions, made me feel like my words mattered. By our third date, I was already adjusting my schedule to fit his. He worked late most nights, so I learned to be flexible. He preferred quiet evenings over crowded restaurants, so I stopped suggesting dinner parties with friends. He was particular about his space, so I made sure to never leave my things lying around his apartment. I told myself this was what love looked like. Love required sacrifice, didn't it? You gave pieces of yourself to build something bigger. You compromised, accommodated, adapted. That was the mature thing to do. Looking back, I can see how foolish I was. I was so afraid of losing him that I slowly erased myself. The first year, our first anniversary, was a quiet affair. Marcus surprised me with dinner at a small Italian restaurant he'd discovered through a client. The food was exquisite, the wine was perfect, and he looked at me across the candlelit table with something that might have been love. "I'm glad I met you," he said, reaching across to take my hand. "You make my life better, Elena." I felt tears prick at my eyes. "You make mine better too." He smiled, and for a moment, everything felt right. The compromises, the sacrifices, the little pieces of myself I'd given up, they all seemed worth it for this moment of connection. But the cracks were already there. I just chose not to see them. Marcus had a way of making everything about him. His work was always more important than mine. His stress was always more significant than my exhaustion. His needs always came first, and I accommodated them without complaint because that was what partners did, wasn't it? I remember the first time I realized something was wrong. I had just received a promotion at work, a significant one that meant more responsibility, more money, more recognition. I rushed home to tell Marcus, practically vibrating with excitement. "Guess what?" I said, bursting through the door. He was on the couch, laptop open, brow furrowed. "What?" he asked, not looking up. "I got the promotion. Senior Marketing Coordinator. They announced it this afternoon. There was a whole presentation, and my boss said, 'That's great, babe,'" he said, still not looking up. "Can we talk about this later? I'm in the middle of something." The words deflated me like a balloon. I stood there, arms wrapped around myself, feeling the joy drain out of the room. I wanted him to be proud of me. I wanted him to celebrate with me. Instead, I was an inconvenience, a distraction from whatever was on his screen. "Sure," I said quietly. Later. Later never came. He worked until midnight that night, and by the time he crawled into bed, I was already asleep. The next morning, he left early for a client meeting. My promotion was never mentioned again. I didn't confront him about it. I didn't even acknowledge the hurt I felt. I simply filed it away, added it to the growing pile of small disappointments I was too afraid to address. Confrontation meant risking the relationship, and I wasn't willing to do that. Not when I had invested so much. The patterns become clear by the second year. The patterns were unmistakable. Marcus was kind when it suited him, attentive when he wanted something, distant when he was preoccupied. I had become an expert at reading the subtle shifts in his mood the way meteorologists track pressure systems. A slight tightening of his jaw meant I should speak less. A distracted hum while I talked meant I should stop altogether. A rare warm glance across the dinner table could carry me through an entire week of doubt. I began to measure my worth by his attention. When he was warm, I felt beautiful and valued. When he was cold, I felt invisible and worthless. My entire emotional solar system revolved around his fluctuating temperatures, and I didn't even realize I was burning myself up in the process. My friends noticed, of course. Sarah, my college roommate, had been gently pointing out the imbalance for years. "Elena," she said one afternoon over coffee, "when was the last time he did something just for you? Without you asking?" I thought about it. "He bought me flowers for my birthday." "That was 4 months ago," she said flatly. "He's busy," I said defensively. "His work is demanding. You don't understand what it's like." "Elena, I understand perfectly. I've been there. I've dated men like Marcus. They take and take and take until there's nothing left, and then they move on to someone else who will give them more. I don't want that to happen to you." "Marcus is different," I insisted. "He loves me. He just shows it differently." Sarah looked at me with such pity that I had to look away. "Does he? Does he really?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because the truth was too painful to admit. My sister Claire was even more blunt. "You've completely disappeared, Ellie," she said during a phone call. "I don't recognize you anymore. You used to be so vibrant, so full of life. Now you just sound exhausted." "I am exhausted," I admitted. "But that's what relationships are. Hard work." "No," Claire said firmly. "That's what one-sided relationships are. Real partnerships are supposed to make life easier, not harder." "When was the last time you felt truly happy?" I couldn't remember. And that was the most damning answer of all. The erosion happened so gradually that I didn't even notice it. I stopped suggesting restaurants that Marcus wouldn't like. I stopped wearing the clothes he didn't compliment. I stopped laughing at my own jokes if he didn't find them funny. I stopped talking about my mother's health because he didn't seem interested. I stopped being a person and became a function. By the third year, I had perfected the art of invisibility. I knew exactly how to exist in Marcus's space without ever being an inconvenience. I kept the apartment spotless, prepared his favorite meals, managed his schedule, and provided emotional support when he needed it, all while making myself completely unobtrusive. I told myself this was partnership. This was what couples did. They supported each other, adjusted to each other, made each other's lives easier. But the truth was simpler and more devastating. I was terrified of being alone. Terrified that if I stopped being useful, Marcus would leave. Terrified that no one else would want me. Terrified that I wasn't enough on my own. So I stayed. I kept giving. I kept hoping that if I loved him enough, he would eventually love me back the way I needed. He never did. The phone call. Everything changed on a damp Wednesday in early September. I was asleep in the apartment we shared on the third floor of an old brick building in Portland when my phone vibrated violently on the nightstand. 2:17 a.m. My heart seized in my chest. Late night calls never brought good news. I snatched up the phone, slipped into the hallway, and answered with a whispered, "Mom?" Her voice came out fragmented, each word costing her strength she didn't have. "They found a lump, sweetheart. The biopsy results came back this afternoon. I didn't want to tell you over the phone, but I couldn't wait another day." "What are you saying?" I asked, though I already knew. Stage 3. Aggressive. They want to start treatment immediately. The floor tilted beneath me. I pressed my forehead against the cool wall, fighting to breathe. My mother had always been my anchor, my constant, the one person in my life who had never failed me. The thought of losing her was unbearable. "I'll come home tomorrow," I said. "I'll take a leave of absence from work. Whatever you need, Mom. I'll be there." "Ellie, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," I said firmly. "You took care of me my whole life. Now it's my turn." She cried, and so did I. We stayed on the phone for nearly an hour, whispering reassurances we barely believed. By the time we hung up, the sky was beginning to lighten, and I felt like I had aged a decade. I crawled back into bed, my body trembling. Marcus stirred beside me. "Everything okay?" he mumbled, eyes still closed. "My mom," I said, my voice hoarse. "She has cancer. Stage 3. He patted my arm once, a gesture so perfunctory it felt like an insult. "That sucks, babe. Let me know if you need anything." And then he rolled over and went back to sleep. I lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling. I had just told him my mother had a life-threatening illness, and he had responded with the same casual indifference he would show a coworker's minor complaint. No questions. No concern. No offer to come with me to visit her. For the first time in 3 years, I felt the full weight of how alone I truly was. The long weeks that followed were a relentless grind. I took a leave of absence from work, citing a family emergency. I drove my mother to endless appointments, oncologists, surgeons, radiologists. I sat in cramped waiting rooms scrolling through medical articles on my phone, trying to arm myself with knowledge. I learned the language of cancer, metastasis, malignant, markers, resection. I held my mother's hand during the first chemotherapy session as the toxic drugs dripped into her veins. I learned how to manage nausea, mouth sores, and the crushing fatigue that came with treatment. At night, I returned to the apartment exhausted, smelling of antiseptic and fear. Marcus was usually on the couch, controller in hand or laptop open to work emails. "How's your mom?" he'd ask. "Rough day," I'd reply. He'd nod sympathetically, then go back to whatever he was doing. No follow-up questions. No genuine curiosity. Just the same hollow script we had been playing for years. He visited the hospital exactly once. He brought flowers, a generic bouquet from the grocery store, and stayed for 20 awkward minutes before checking his watch. "I've got a big deadline," he explained. "It's fine," I said, because I had learned not to expect anything more. Inside, something small and vital began to wither. A tiny seed of resentment, planted by years of neglect, finally took root. I didn't acknowledge it at first. I pushed it down, buried it under layers of duty and obligation and fear. But it was there, growing, waiting for the moment it would finally break through. The breaking point had happened on a Tuesday evening in late October. I had spent the afternoon at the hospital, sitting with my mother through another brutal chemotherapy session. She had vomited violently afterward, and I had held her hair back while fighting my own tears. "It's okay, Mom," I whispered. "I'm here. I've got you." "I'm so sorry," she gasped. "I'm such a burden." "You are never a burden," I said fiercely. "Never. Do you hear me? You are the strongest person I know, and I am so proud to be your daughter." She cried, and so did I, and by the time I left the hospital, I felt like I had been scraped hollow. I drove home on autopilot, my mind blank with exhaustion. Marcus was already there when I arrived. He was in the kitchen, loosening his tie, his laptop open on the counter. "Smells amazing," he said, gesturing toward the stove. I had forgotten. Earlier that morning, before everything at the hospital, I had put chicken marsala in the slow cooker. Marcus's favorite. I had done it without thinking, another automatic gesture in a lifetime of automatic gestures. I looked at the plated dish on the counter. Then I looked at Marcus. Then something inside me snapped. I didn't hand him the plate. I picked up a fork and began eating the food myself, standing up, still in my hospital hoodie. The chicken tasted like salt and freedom and grief all at once. I couldn't stop eating. I was starving, not just for food, but for something I couldn't quite name. Marcus frowned. "You're not saving any for me?" I looked at him for a long moment. "Not tonight." He stared at me like I had grown a second head. "What's wrong with you?" And that was the moment I saw him clearly for the first time. The man I had given 3 years of my life to, the man I had sacrificed so much for, the man I had loved with a desperate, consuming love, he was a stranger. A selfish, oblivious stranger who had no idea who I really was. "I have to go back to the hospital tomorrow," I said. "They're starting a new round of chemo. I'll probably be there all day." He nodded distractedly. "I've got that meeting with the clients from, you don't have to tell me," I cut him off. "I don't need to know your schedule anymore." There was a long silence. Marcus looked at me, really looked at me, and for the first time, I think he saw something was different. "Elena, what's going on with you?" he asked. "You've been acting weird for weeks." "I'm tired," I said, and it was the truest thing I had said in years. "I'm so tired, Marcus." He reached for me, but I stepped back. I couldn't let him touch me. Not now. Not when I was so close to breaking. "Let me know if you need anything," he said, and the words were so hollow, so utterly devoid of meaning, that I almost laughed. "Okay," I said. "I will." But we both knew I wouldn't. The awakening the next day, I started to change. It wasn't a dramatic transformation, no grand declarations, no dramatic breakup speech. I simply started reclaiming the pieces of myself I had given away. I began waking up at 5:30 a.m. and running along the river trail near our apartment. The first mornings were brutal. My body protested, my lungs burned in the crisp autumn air, and every step felt like punishment. But I kept going. Each morning, I went a little further, and each morning, I felt a little stronger. I joined a restorative yoga class at a studio close to the hospital. The instructor's gentle voice and the slow, deliberate movements taught me something I had forgotten: how to breathe for myself. For an hour each week, I wasn't Elena the caretaker or Elena the girlfriend or Elena the daughter. I was just Elena. And that was enough. At work, I accepted the promotion I had declined twice before. I had been afraid of the extra responsibility, afraid that the longer hours would make me less available to Marcus. But he had never made himself available to me, so why was I sacrificing my career for someone who wouldn't do the same? I began meal prepping for myself and my mother instead of Marcus. I stopped stocking the fridge with his favorite foods. I stopped ironing his shirts. I stopped managing his schedule. I stopped being his personal assistant and started being a person again. My appearance changed gradually. I cut my long chestnut hair into a sleek bob that framed my face and swung with new energy. I bought clothes in rich, saturated colors, emerald greens, deep burgundies, warm mustards, shades that made me feel seen. I started wearing the silver moon necklace my mother had given me years ago, a quiet talisman of strength. Marcus didn't notice. He was too wrapped up in his own world, a big project at the architecture firm, client dinners, the occasional night out with colleagues. I had become so good at being invisible that he simply didn't see me at all. But I saw myself. And for the first time in years, I liked what I saw. The confrontation 3 months passed. It was a cold Thursday evening in early December when the illusion finally cracked. Marcus came home later than usual, his face tight with frustration. "Babe," he called out. "Did you pick up my dry cleaning like I asked?" Silence answered him. He found me in the living room, curled on the couch with a novel, a cup of chamomile tea steaming beside me. Soft lamplight caught the new highlights in my hair and the calm set of my shoulders. I was wearing an emerald sweater he didn't recognize, and I looked peaceful. Radiant, even. "I didn't have time today," I said, glancing up from my book. He blinked. "You didn't have time?" "No," I said evenly, and turned the page. Marcus stared at me, and for the first time in months, he really looked. The haircut. The stack of books on the coffee table, actual fiction, not the relationship self-help titles that used to litter the apartment. The colorful calendar on the fridge filled with yoga classes, dinners with friends, and weekend trips. A new framed photo of my mother and me laughing together on the mantel. His stomach dropped. "What's going on with you lately, Elena? You've been different." I closed my book and met his gaze. "I'm living my life, Marcus." "Different how?" he pressed. "You're not yourself." "Maybe this is who I've always been," I said. "You just never bothered to notice." The conversation that unfolded over the next hour was one of the hardest of my life. Marcus paced the living room, listing our history. 4 years. The trips we'd taken. The way I had always been there for him. He sounded genuinely confused, even hurt, as though I had betrayed him somehow. "I spent 4 years trying to be your son, Marcus," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I rose and said according to your moods. When you were kind, I felt worthy. When you were cold or distracted, I felt like I was failing. I dimmed myself constantly so you could shine brighter. My mother got cancer, and I sat in those hospital rooms alone day after day because I didn't want to inconvenience you. You visited once. You never asked how I was holding up beyond the bare minimum. You accepted all the love and effort I gave like it was your due, but you never reciprocated it. His face flushed. I'm not a mind reader, Elena. I can't know what you need if you don't tell me. I shouldn't have to beg for basic care and curiosity from my partner of 4 years, I said quietly. I was drowning, Marcus, and you never even looked down to see. He tried the old pattern, the one where I would soften, apologize, and we would move forward in the same lopsided orbit. But I couldn't do it anymore. The river of my energy had changed course. We can fix this, he insisted. I'll do better. I'll be more present. Just don't, he broke off, looking genuinely lost. I'm not broken, Marcus, I said softly. I was just asleep for a very long time. And now I'm awake. The departure the next morning, I made a decision. I packed a small suitcase, not to end things permanently, not yet, but to spend the weekend at my mother's new apartment. She had completed the worst of her treatment and was healing at home. I wanted to cook for her, watch old movies, and simply be present. Marcus found me at the door, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. When are you coming back? I don't know, I said truthfully. Elena, please. We can fix this. I'll do better. I smiled sadly. I'm not angry, Marcus. I'm just finished. He opened his mouth to say something else, but I didn't want to hear it. I kissed his cheek out of long habit and walked out the door. The click of the latch behind me was the sound of freedom. Marcus stood in the suddenly too large apartment, the silence pressing in on him. For the first time, he felt the full depth of my absence, not just my physical presence, but the constant, invisible labor of love I had performed for years. The meals, the emotional cushioning, the way I had made his life smoother without ever being asked. He had taken it all for granted, assuming it was infinite. And now it was gone. The rebirth my mother's apartment was small and cozy, filled with the familiar smells of herbs and cooking. She was sitting on the couch, wrapped in a thick blanket, her face pale but her eyes bright. Ellie, she said, patting the seat beside her. Come sit with me. I sank onto the couch, the exhaustion of the past months finally catching up with me. I left him, Mom. I know, she said gently. I'm proud of you. I don't know what happens next, I admitted. I feel so lost. She reached over and took my hand. That's okay. Being lost is part of finding your way. I spent years being lost after your father left. I thought I would never find myself again. But I did. And so will you. We sat in comfortable silence for a long time. Outside, the winter sun was setting early, painting the sky in bruised purples and golds. But inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, hope. The healing the weeks that followed were both painful and liberating. I spent hours talking to my mother, confessing the things I had kept hidden for so long. The way Marcus had made me feel small. The way I had sacrificed my own dreams for his comfort. The way I had convinced myself that love meant suffering. You were never meant to suffer, Ellie, my mother said gently. Love is supposed to make you stronger, not weaker. But I loved him, I said. I really did. I know, sweetheart. And that's nothing to be ashamed of. You gave him your whole heart. The shame is his, not yours. I also reconnected with my friends. Sarah and Claire came to visit, bringing bottles of wine and fierce hugs and the kind of unconditional support I had been missing for years. "We're so proud of you, Ellie," Sarah said. "You have no idea how long we've been waiting for this." "Waiting for what?" "For you to remember who you are." I cried then, not from sadness, but from relief. I had been so afraid of being alone that I had forgotten I was never truly alone. I had people who loved me, people who saw me, people who would never ask me to dim my light for their comfort. I gave myself 2 months to heal. No dating, no searching, no looking back. Just me, my mother, and the slow process of rediscovering who I was without Marcus. I ran every morning, pushing myself further and further. I took up painting, something I hadn't done since college. I read books I'd been meaning to read for years. I started writing in a journal, pouring out the thoughts and feelings I had suppressed for so long. In January, I went on a solo trip to the mountains. I rented a small cabin, drove up alone, and spent 4 days hiking, reading, and simply being. I sat on the porch each morning, watching the sun rise over the snow-covered peaks, and I understood something important. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for anything. I wasn't waiting for a text, a call, a compliment. I wasn't waiting for someone else to define my worth. I was just living. And it was enough. On the last day of my trip, my phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. *, I miss you. Can we talk? *, I read the message, felt the old familiar tug, and then set the phone down. I watched the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and pink, and I thought about the life I had left behind. I had spent 4 years orbiting Marcus's sun, burning myself up in the process. I had given him everything I had, and he had taken it all without gratitude or reciprocity. He had never asked me what I needed, never offered me the same care I gave him. And now he missed me. He missed having someone to manage his life, to cook his meals, to make him feel important. He missed the convenience of me. But I didn't miss him. Not really. I missed the idea of him, the hope of what we could have been. I missed the person I had convinced myself he was. That person had never existed. I typed a reply and hit send before I could change my mind. *, I'm glad you're doing well. But I'm not coming back. I hope you find what you're looking for. I finally found myself, *, and then I turned off my phone and watched the stars come out. I stood on the balcony of my mother's new apartment, a thick blanket wrapped around my shoulders. The building was modest but comfortable, in a quiet neighborhood with good schools and friendly neighbors. My mother was inside, napping after a gentle walk we had taken together that morning. Her strength was returning slowly but surely. The doctors were optimistic. I had made peace with the past. Not through anger or revenge, but through acceptance. I had given Marcus everything I had, and it hadn't been enough. But that was his loss, not mine. I had found a new job, one that offered more flexibility and better pay. I was painting again, actually selling a few pieces online. I had made new friends, joined a book club, started cooking classes. My life was full in a way it hadn't been for years. And I had learned something important. Something I would carry with me forever. Love doesn't require sacrifice. Real love makes you more of who you are, not less. Real love doesn't ask you to dim your light so someone else can shine brighter. Real love lifts you up, carries you through the hard times, and celebrates you in the good ones. I had spent years believing that love meant giving. Now I knew that love also meant receiving. It meant being seen, valued, heard. It meant being allowed to take up space without apology. My phone buzzed on the railing. Another message from Marcus. I had changed his contact name to past and his messages to muted. I didn't need to block him. I simply didn't need him anymore. I watched the sun crest the ridge, bathing the world in warm golden light. For the first time in years, I felt completely at peace. The sun was rising on my own horizon, steady, warm, and entirely mine. It would never again depend on whether someone else was kind that day. If you're reading this, and you recognize yourself in my story, I want you to know something. You are not alone. You are not wrong for wanting more. You are not selfish for needing to be seen. The people who love you will never ask you to shrink yourself. They will hold space for your full humanity, the messy, complicated, beautiful truth of who you are. And if you're in a relationship where you feel like you're constantly giving and never receiving, where your needs are always secondary to theirs, where you can't even remember the last time you felt truly happy, please hear me when I say this, you deserve better. You deserve someone who will see you, really see you, and stay. Someone who will hold your hand through the hard times without making you feel like a burden. Someone who will be proud of your success instead of threatened by it. You deserve someone who will rise with you, not ask you to rise for them. I spent 4 years learning that lesson. I don't regret a single moment of it, because it led me to where I am now. Standing on a balcony, watching my own sun rise, knowing that I am complete exactly as I am. The sun will always rise for you. You just have to be willing to stop rising for someone else. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, never let anyone dim your light. See you in the next one.